Good afternoon and welcome to the InduSoft webinar series. This afternoon we're going to talk about SCADA and HMI security in InduSoft Web Studio. My name is Larry Combs. I manage the customer service and training organization for InduSoft, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. We have two guests with us. The first person who'll be talking to is Sundar Krishnan. He is a cybersecurity and counterterrorism consultant working for InduSoft. He's going to talk about enhancing cybersecurity on your InduSoft projects. And also with us is Chuck Adams, president of Capstone Works, who is a local IT managed service provider here in Austin, Texas. Chuck is going to talk about firewalls and other SCADA security considerations. So without further ado, let me introduce Sundar.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Sundar Krishnan, and I would be going through some slides that we put together here for cybersecurity on InduSoft projects, how best we can improve security defenses on InduSoft projects. There'll be some slides also on guidelines on these areas. So without much ado, let me move on to the presentation slides. The agenda, as I was just mentioning just now for this discussion, for this presentation is, there's going to be some slides pertaining to the background of cybersecurity awareness, the defenses, measures that's in the current SCADA world. A few slides will be dedicated towards guidelines on how to improve security on our InduSoft projects. There are a few slides for trainings and for the readings and certifications that we all can benefit from. And finally, there would be a summary of all that we have discussed. So let's get going on this presentation, and we'll move on to the slide decks. So as we all aware of, we are in the SCADA industry for long, and we do know it's so important for the SCADA machinery to work, to function, and to be secure. It's part of the nation's critical infrastructure, and when we talk of the SCADA world as such, we talk about all those we know of the electronic hardware, the firmware, the computers, the applications, and all these things that connect to each other. So that's the kind of world that we would be talking about in this presentation. When we talk of threats from the cyberspace on this SCADA infrastructure, they are real, and there are a lot of malicious people or actors or hackers who are interested in causing some kind of disruption. So there is a considerable threat. And I would say it's an ongoing, feature that's kind of it's growing every day. So these threats are for real. And just as a number, it takes around 416 days, before an advanced hacker can be detected on a network. So this is just a number of days. It's more than a year, and for a year, a hacker can very well be having an access to a network and go undetected by all those tools, by all those measures that we enforce. And this is quite a surprising number of days that these hackers can stay quiet and put on networks doing what they want to do. And the cost of all these things, the cost of all these cyber attacks that we talk about, they are in billions. And this is a number, the point on the slide tells us it's like 8.9 billion in 2012, which is quite an old statistical number. So these cost of cyber attacks they run into billions, and it's difficult to measure the cost. So with that said, the takeaway from the slide is the SCADA in the SCADA world, cyber threats are for real. They do cost us a lot. And many a times these malwares, these hackers, or these kind of malicious programs, they go undetected for very long. So with that said, we'll move on to the our next slide. This next slide is about the people or the actors in this SCADA cybersecurity world, or just even for that matter, cybersecurity world. We talk about actors or the players in this world. We talk of the white hat folks, the black hat folks, the gray hat folks, and so on. They're classified into these hats. The white hat is the good cops. They take care of all the cybersecurity defenses. They try to, perform penetration testing on networks, on systems, and try to find out the vulnerabilities. And they also hack for non-malicious purposes, just to prove proof of concept kind of situation. So the white hat folks are all the good guys in this cybersecurity world. The black hat folks, well, there are various types. They start off with being what we call as script kiddies, and these folks are people who want to assemble some code, who would like to play around, get some free online pieces of code, programs. They just put them together, see how they perform, build a logic. By and large, they don't write every line of code to hack a system, but they would then borrow code or purchase or probably even get it from online forums and so on, hacker forums and so on. So with that said, these script kiddies, they do pose a considerable threat because they are on the learning curve. They can graduate anytime into more dangerous actors. So along with them, we can also categorize, we have heard of these insider threats, folks within an organization or a company who try to put together some pieces of code to try to see if things can work, can I get access to something, and so on. So these insider threats are also for real. As we all know, we are always concerned and aware of these things, these folks. And they are also like the script kiddies. They can grow and turn out to be malicious actors. And then we have the carrier or the mainstream hackers. We hear about all these folks who hack for some monetary gain and so on. There are hackers for a cause. They do support some cause, and they go hack a website or cause some disruption in networks and so on, just for proving some points. Then, of course, we have the final type of hackers. These hackers are more of a sponsored and terrorist folks. They are pretty much driven through ideas, maybe from other nations and so on, from other groups. So they are also they also operate with a lot of malicious intent. So with that said, we have the final type of actors in this world. We do call them the gray hat folks. They hack for a fee. They kind of switch sides. They can be white hat folks. They can sometimes be black hat folks. So these folks are they just change sides whenever they have a profit. So with that said, this slide really showcases the type of people involved in cybersecurity world these days. And very easily we can categorize them at least into the good and the bad cops. So with that said, we'll move on to the next slide. Next slide is about the existing standards and guidelines. It's just a chart here. The SCADA world has a lot of standards and guidelines in cybersecurity, and these standards and guidelines, they do address various threat groups or threats. And this is a study. There was a study done picking up quite a lot of standards and guidelines, and then they plotted this chart. We can see here the malicious code is scoring pretty high here. There's a lot of focus from these standards and guidelines in the industry to deal with malicious code kind of threats. And along the chart, we can also see the DOS stands for denial of services, spoofing, and so on. These are all the threats in the world, and this chart is, again, just to showcase how these standards and guidelines are, dealing with these threats. So how do they, talk about these threats? So with that said, there's another slide in the next next slide. There's another chart. Which also deals with these same standards and guidelines, and how they focus on countermeasure groups. So when we talk of the countermeasures are like the authentication measures on a system, the cryptographical measures that we have enforced on systems. So the SCADA world standards and guidelines focus a lot on authentication, as we can see from this study. And all the way to the right is the system or the security of the organization. So which we call as, in layman's terms, as access control and so on. So if you can see, the focus is a lot on authentication, cryptography, firewalls, and so on. So it's not that the security of the organization is not of much concern. It's just that there are a lot of already good lot of measures and good lot of what I can say is countermeasures on that area. So these standards and guidelines focus more on the authentication, cryptography, firewall, and these kind of things. So with that said, we'll move on to the next slide. From now on, we would be focusing more on how we can improve cyber defenses on InduSoft projects, or we can call it as guidelines on implementing better cybersecurity measures. So from now on, we'll be dealing with a lot of InduSoft specific slides. We'll start off with something called risk management. We are all familiar with risk management process, and it's a pretty common topic risk management is the backbone of a lot of cybersecurity defenses, measures. Everything about cybersecurity implementation is all starting. They all start off with risk management processes, and the risk management process, as outlined in the slide, is actually identifying the vulnerabilities and threats and deciding what countermeasures can be taken to reduce these risks, so to an acceptable level. So the risk is often measured as a product of vulnerability, probability, and impact. Probability is sometimes also spoken as likelihood of the risk happening. The consequences is also sometimes interchanged with impact of the risk. So in the risk management process, it's key to have a risk plan, a risk matrix, an assessment, and all that. It's really important to have this whole set of the risk management process properly enforced, both on InduSoft projects or even probably on real live production systems. So, and also the risk assessment. When we perform a risk assessment, it should be performed at all kind of levels, especially on an application. It should be performed at screen levels, control levels, and so on. When we talk of risk assessment, sometimes people ask is how much should be part of the risk assessment efforts. The boundary on assessment should really include anything and everything that can be thought about. The networks, the drivers on the applications, the application as such, the databases, the encryption standards, probably even the resources on the project team, even the stakeholders. They're all part of they could all be risks at some time. So all these kind of entities should be part of the risk assessment efforts. So the boundary should not be something that's closed or defined as such. It should be pretty much open to almost all kind of players in the whole business, or on the project. So with that said, it's also asked as people also ask as what can be so much used, what kind of tools that we can use for risk management processes. We do have CSET as a nice tool from Department of Homeland Security. It's a free tool that can be used to manage risk. Risk registers. They're all customizable registers that every company can put together. We'll talk about it in the next slide. The CIA ranking, we'll also talk about it. It's the confidentiality, the integrity, the accountability ranking. The RACI chart, we'll also talk about this, RACI charts, and then the subsequent slides. And also the risk matrix. The matrix is a plot between vulnerability, probability, and impact. We'll also see this in the next slide. And the key to all this details on risk management is it should be continuous and iterative, and should be performed during a project's life cycle, or should be at any time on the live production system. So it's part of an ongoing, it's an ongoing process at all times. Risk management has to always be in the background. So with that said, we'll go to the next slide. This slide is going to be an extension of what we spoke in the previous slide. There's the risk matrix on the left-hand side. If you see that, it's a plot between consequences and likelihood. Risk matrix is not a standard, layout for all organizations. It can be customized according to your needs. There are a lot of documents on the internet to how to do it. Please take some time to put together risk matrix, and should be part of your security audits if possible. And output of all this risk management process are the incident management plans, the disaster recovery plans, and the business continuity plans, and so on. Very, very important to have these plans, and just not only a plan, should be also be enforced, and they should be often, I can say on a periodic basis at least, some kind of a disaster recovery exercise performed at the business. So it's good to have all these things. It's good, and it's much better to also test and see if they really work. It's just not a plan that we have on a paper, on a document, tucked away in some kind of a folder and not much put to use. So these plans, these incident management plans, the disaster recovery plans, and BCPs, all these kind of plans, it's really good to have them put into some kind of an exercise and tested out to verify if they're really adequate enough. Small points there, risk treatments. We know how to deal with risks. We know how to avoid. If you can avoid, please avoid the risk. If you can try and mitigate it, let's mitigate. Well, we can always share it, or we can transfer it. We can outsource the risk to some provider or risk vendor who's capable of dealing with that risk. If we can't deal with that risk, it's good to give it to someone or outsource it to some other business who can really deal with it. So, or lastly, we can always insure ourselves against the risk. The last thing is retention. You kind of accept budget and deal with the risk. So the points on this slide is all about the tools and the plans and the outputs of this risk management process. With that said, we'll move on to the next slide. Again, this is going to be an extension of the risk management process slide. It's the RACI charts that we spoke about earlier. This is about who can be responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So every risk has to have an owner. There should be a person who can deal with the risk, a subject matter expert, and so on. So this is a RACI chart is a nice way to have it, or have all the risks plotted, and the owners, and the who's responsible, accountable, and so on, all plotted on the matrix. So this is self-explanatory. There are a lot of documents on the internet that deal with RACI charts. Please do have a look at it. If you all don't have on your organization processes, please do have risk management process ongoing, and try to incorporate these tools. With that, we'll move on to the next slide. And this is all about project security designs. Design documents on a project are always nice, and it's good to have security design specific documentation for all the folks and system integrators on this call, the customers. If you all don't really see a document, you all don't really have a document on our InduSoft project, please make sure that there is a design document just for the security of the project, the security details on the project itself. This kind of design document should contain the design, the architecture, and this document is actually should tie into some of the vulnerabilities and the threats in the risk assessment. So this document should not be something that is coined and put together without taking an input from the risk assessment. So the vulnerabilities and the threats that were identified due to a risk assessment should also tie into the project security, how best we can deal with these threats, and how what security can be enforced to mitigate the threats or the vulnerabilities that was identified in the risk assessment efforts. So These documents should not contain any passwords, encryption keys, and the sensitive information. Well, those things have to stay away from these documents. Please don't put all that in this security document of the project. Please keep them in a secure storage away from this particular document. So lastly, I would just summarize on this screen saying that these security documents, the security design documents, is really essential. It helps identify the security gaps, and it really helps during an incident or a forensic investigation also. So, and this document should be up to date, should be part of an audit, if possible. So, with that said, we'll move on to the next slide. This slide is pretty easy to understand, something that we all deal with in our day-to-day life. We do have a lot of passwords. We often use them for various purposes in our personal lives, at work, and so on. This slide was put together with the intent to show the table at the right-hand side on tools that are in the market, free tools in the market that can crack a password. So these tools take less than a second for a 4-character length password. If you have a password that is alpha-numeric, lowercase, uppercase, 0 to 9, and so on, these tools can easily break such passwords within a second. So the best thing that we can do is to have a really complex password, something like 8 to 9 character long at least, with alpha-numeric, lower, uppercases, and so on. And not to forget symbols, or what we call special characters, involved. The more complex, the more lengthier the password, the better it is going to be in security. So this table on the right-hand side should be self-explanatory. We can see how much time it takes for these tools to break if you have a very weak password. Point to note on this slide: we all need to reset our passwords periodically, and also during go-lives of projects. And when we complete a project, all passwords that were set on a project known to the team members, all of those passwords should be changed when we go live. That's a nice thing to do. And if there are any default passwords, if there is a third-party application that really has a connection that can be utilized, a connection to a third-party application with a default password, please don't use that default. Please do notify the vendor. Say, well, this password is already well documented with your product. It's not secure. People in the world know that this is the password, and this can be used easily. So attackers and these hackers normally start off with documentation. So whatever is on the documentation, passwords that are there already, they're going to try those things first. So please don't go along and use default passwords, especially from third-party application vendors. If they do have anything like that, please talk to them, see that if those passwords, if they can be changed. With that said, this slide is pretty self-explanatory. Otherwise, we move on to the next slide. This again is an extension of the previous slide. On InduSoft projects, please use security beyond passwords. We do have e-keyboard. We call it the virtual keyboard, the e-keyboard on a feature on the InduSoft project, and they do come with this scramble key feature, where every time you press a virtual key on the keyboard, the whole layout of the keyboard changes and they scramble around. So you get the keys not going to be the same place on the layout of the keyboard at any time. So that's a nice feature. So for all the customers, for all the integrators on this call, for system integrators, I would really encourage all of us to push for these kind of security, not just using passwords there. And of course, patterns, we do know the pattern concept features that are there on the pattern matching and touch screen and all that stuff. It's nice to have all those things. So that's a good thing to enforce in addition to passwords. Control level, screen level, and this, the controls on the screen. All these levels, there are various levels of security. So we can always enforce security at those levels also. So I'm sure we do it, but if there is scope for adding more security and at various levels, please, we need to do that. A takeaway on this, we need to always be careful about excess security versus user comfort. We don't want to really lock down a system so hard that the users find it really uncomfortable using it. So there's some kind of a comfort factor here that we need to take care of. And safety versus security, very, very important. How do we balance both of these things? Well, I would always preach for the safety aspect. If there is any emergencies related to safety, we need to always have some provisions for a security override. So when it comes to balancing safety and security, let's go the old-fashioned way. Safety is always very important. With that said, we'll move on to the next slide. Again, this is something related to passwords. Again, there are a lot of features on the InduSoft Studio. The features are this slide is highlighting the group level features of how secure we can make a password for the whole group. We can enforce certain rules for the whole group, people who belong to a group, users belonging to a group. So we can have some runtime security and all the auto log off options, account locking up and all that after a few tries and so on. So this is a good place to look for additional security at a group level itself. So please, if you have not taken some time to look at these things, please play around, and you can see all the details of the group level security on the advanced button. So please, let's try to enforce some of these things on a group level at least. So with that said, we'll just move on to the next slide. And this slide talks about security layers. I think many of us have seen this layers of security. We do have security at file levels. If you right-click the file and you can see a last menu item out there that says password protection. So there is a feature there. We can always add in a password for that file. Also, under the project tab, we do have security layer for which kind of secures the whole project. So we may have layer security at control level, at screen level, and so on. But if you want to really have a project level, the whole project, this is a nice feature. We can always go for the main password, and we can set a password there for the whole project. So there are a lot of tutorials on the InduSoft website. There is a very detailed tutorial on these two aspects, the file level security, the project level security, and various other details about security. Please take some time to go visit the online tutorial. It's on the InduSoft website. You can always search for the using the keyword of security, and you can get a lot of artifacts on the website and also these videos out there. So with that said, we'll move on to the next slide. The next slide is about encryptions. We do have a lot of encryption in various various places on the studio, but this is of importance for us. We do have security at a project level, and what really happens here? We can encrypt all the files on a project. We can put a password, and that would really encrypt with a good strong encryption logic, and this is a built-in security feature. So we can give this a try. It will be really helpful, especially if we do have intellectual property IP concerns on the project. So I would really recommend that we do give this a try and use it. So with that said, we'll go to the next slide. This slide is related to group level security. So when we say we can sometimes call the group as roles. So in InduSoft, we call it a group. In the layman's terms, we do sometimes call it a security roles that people enjoy. So we need to balance the security group versus overall complexity of the project. There is some fine balancing effort to go on there. But the point here is I want to really highlight this. The default guest group, if it has already not been trimmed down, if it's not been already looked into, please do take care of the guest groups on the InduSoft projects. They sometimes carry a lot of privileges along with them, and this is something that by default it comes along sometimes. So if really not required, it's nice to go to have a look again at this guest groups and trim it down. Restrict the administrative groups. That's really very, very important. Not all the users should be belonging to the administrative group. So we need to segregate users into as many groups as possible. Each group should have its own defined role and a purpose to exist. The guest is just a guest, and it would be highly recommended. I would really recommend to even take away the guest. We don't even need probably sometimes a guest out on the project security design. So we can always have an administrative group, yes. The administrative group should be restricted to probably 1 or 2 users, should be part of this group. The rest of the users on the InduSoft project, please do create as many groups as possible, as many groups as needed, and for a purpose, so that we can segregate the users into various groups and not club them into single groups or reduced number of groups. So that being said, the takeaway on this slide is role segregation. It's good to have users belonging to groups and groups defining their own levels of security. Reduce and restrict the number of users on our administrative group. With that, we'll move to the next slide. This is about the databases that we often connect to. Databases, they do have their own security in place. So when we design, we sometimes wear the DBA hats ourselves, and we go to design the security on the database. That time, let's try not to have easy passwords for users and so on. And always recommended to have integrated security. If it's a SQL Server database, it's much, much easier to have Windows integrated security and so on. And password expiry on a database user, very, very important. Please don't create a database user and have the password set to infinite time on it so that the password stays for years. Password expiry is very important. And also not to forget the logon attempts. When we have Oracle databases and so on, it can be a little complex, but there are a lot of commands in the Oracle website and on the SQL websites to really walk us through the steps on how to lock a user if they fail on many or some number of logon attempts. So these things have to be all taken care of. We need to spend some time to design the security of database, and of course we need to limit the privileges and the roles. Sometimes we create a user there, we probably give them all kind of roles, like a database backup operator, an update privileges, and so on, administrative privileges. We don't need to give all those things for that user. If it is so, please trim it down. Please bring down all that security privileges that come, that you can always check and grant. So we need to really evaluate what the user really needs and how much that user really needs. Sometimes we can even restrict the user on the database just to view only 1 or 2 columns on a table. We don't even need to probably give the user access to the whole table. If that's the case, we can always lock down the user to only see 1 column of the table and so on. So all that is there, all that features are there on the databases these days. So please do take time to think about all that and incorporate such security features on our projects. And lastly, not to forget the connection timeouts, databases, especially when we code from an application, when we are writing the code on the from the studio, connections sometimes we open, we don't really care to close them down. That's one issue. The other issue is timeout. Sometimes we really have a connection that's sitting for long, and they should automatically time out. So these kind of things can be done on the studio side itself. or coding side, or it can be also done on the database side because of the connection pools. So wherever it's done, but let's try to remember that these things are all important and they need to be taken care of. With that said, we'll go to the next slide. It's like an extension of the same database concepts. It's about the objects on the databases. We say objects is all about the views, tables, and procedures, functions, and all that stuff. Encrypt data on the tables. Sometimes we forget to do that. We don't care to do that sometimes. Encryption is all available features on the databases. All we need to do is just go and activate those features on the database. So encrypt data, as you can see on this screen picture here, data only on a particular column is encrypted. And please do use the default encryption that is provided by the vendor. If Microsoft says, this is the encryption that can be used on SQL Server, please go with it. Please, it's often said it's not very wise to create our own encryption algorithms. Let's go with what the vendors often, talk about, or what they, recommend. So these encryption features are on the databases, and let's try to activate. Let's activate those things when really needed. One small point, a very simple thing there. Your objects on the databases. If you see on the screen picture there, you do have those tables. They're easy to read. Any insiders, or these script kiddies, as we can call them, they probably would have a minute or two of some time, privileged time, to play around on a database before they get busy. And this time they can always go poke around and see what's there. And it's always nice to have some cryptic names on tables and procedures and so on, and so that it's a small, tiny deterrent, at least I would say. It really wouldn't really stop them from doing something, but at least it would give them some kind of extra time. It would just make it a little more difficult for them. So these small things can be also taken care of. So with that said, we'll go to the next slide. It's all about web certificates. Pretty common topic, often spoken about. Secure connections, when possible. HTTPS connection is always recommended. Please do enforce this on the InduSoft projects. And another point on the slide, our browsers are sometimes very old. Our browsers are not updated. Our browsers are obsolete. Please upgrade your browsers. Try to move to the latest versions. They are more secure. Of course, we need to patch them up and all that. So we need to have those things taken care of. Point to note here, we should not be having internet access on production servers as much as possible. No emails, no surfing the net, nothing. Production machines are only for production, period, and nothing else should be done on it. This is something should be very strictly enforced, and no internet access, absolutely no internet access on production machines. With that said, we'll move to the next slide. This is about ports. Chuck Adams will be talking about ports in his slides, but small points here on this slide. There are a lot of default ports that we often use. When possible and if possible, let us try to avoid the default ports. Let's always go for ports that are not documented and something that's default, because the hackers, they often start off trying to hack with these default ports, because it's already on documentation. They probably know, they're taking a guess. FTP is port 21. They would take a guess. Let's try port 21 when we are hacking. Probably the folks didn't really care to change the port. There would be FTP connections going on port 21. Let's give it a try. So these things are some things that, if possible and when possible, we can always avoid. So let's try to choose ports that are not really default. There's a point here that's very important, the last point on the slide. There is the TCP server, connections on the project settings, and this defaults to 1234. And this is the default value that's already pre-populated on the project. So if it is already there, let's try to move away from 1234 It's well documented, so if there's a hacker there who's interested in doing some malicious activity, they would always start with 1, 2, 3, 4. So if it is there on your projects, please do contact your integrators, and we need to move away from that default value. So it's something to be done. The earlier the better. I wouldn't really say it has to be done tomorrow, but it should be on our radars to try to move away from 1, 2, 3, 4. If we can configure that to another port, let's go for that. With that, we'll move to the next slide. This is about LDAP, or what we call as Active Directory Authentication. I'm not very sure if we all use this so often, but it's really recommended. It's really out there for a reason. It gives a lot of benefits, apart from just being a single password to remember. It's standardized, it's more secure in many ways, and it's a highly recommended protocol. LDAP is a highly recommended protocol on InduSoft projects. Let's try to move into these kind of authentication processes. Chuck will be speaking about this also in his slides, so I won't spend a lot of time on this slide. We'll move to the next slide. This is again about service accounts, and again about the integrated security, something that is coming from the previous slide. We should try to enforce integrated security on all our connections as much as possible. This is a very, very secure way, rather than having usernames and managing passwords and privileges and all that, the groups and all that. It's a very cumbersome security management process if we go with all that. In the integrated security, it's much easier and it's much secure to try to enforce integrated security on our applications. So point to note on this is we should not be using NT administrator accounts or groups on our security connections. So if we are part of those administrative accounts on the domain, we shouldn't be then using integrated security for our application. So Chuck will be talking about this on his slides also in detail. But the point here to note is, if we are domain administrators on the domain, we should not then use our privilege on the domain as the authentication process on the project. So that is something that we should stay away from. So with that, move to the next slide. As I said, this slide and this area of discussion, Chuck will be dealing with in his slides. So we would move to the next. This is pretty interesting. File level, folder level security and all that stuff. Very common. We sometimes forget to enforce these cleanup activities. We try to move in a hurried way to production, live, we go live and all that. We sometimes forget when we are on projects. Apart from projects, sometimes over time, if we are not really checked on all these folder level permissions, there could be some insiders who try to set some permissions slowly and then, really not cause an, eyebrows to be raised. And so they may slowly sneak in and set some security for themselves. So it's good to always check for this security on these folders. File level security and so on should be part of your audit processes if possible, and check for missing DLL. Sometimes DLL files, drivers can be missing, or sometimes they wouldn't be even. They could be even corrupted. So there could be malware infected drivers out there. We wouldn't be probably even knowing. But there is a nice way to know if the driver file has been infected with the malware, or is it a nice healthy file. And the simplest way to do that is to use what we call as the checksum checks. So if we use tools like FCIV, this is a file checksum integrity verifier. It comes along. It's a Microsoft product. It's free. We can use that kind of tools to see if the DLL is the driver or the DLL file is genuine or not. Every file has its own signature. If the file has been manipulated or infected with the malware, the SHA-1, SHA-1, or the MD5 signature will certainly change. So how do we know if this driver file is genuine or is it good? We can always hit that file against a SHA-1 signature. We can extract the SHA-1 or the MD5 signature of that file and compare it against the vendor-provided file, and then we can see the signatures if they match. Well, the file that you have is genuine. If the file signatures don't match, we can easily say that the file being used is corrupted or it's been an infected file and so on. So it's good to do these checks. SCIV is a free tool. It also has a lot of switches and features on the tool. We can always download the tool and give it a try. So I would really recommend project integrators, folks who are actually normally going live into a project. It's always good to do this on the go live steps to check if the production files, the files on the production servers are genuine, if they are really healthy files and they're not been corrupted. Sometimes the files can get corrupted during the project life cycle. Their driver may be corrupted, but then we may move unknowingly this driver file into production, and it can cause a lot of troubles. So that also is a scenario. So while we move files into productions or any production file that's already there, we're going to be using the file. It's good to always give it a check on the signature to really see if it's really authentic, if it's really a genuine file, So the SCIV is an easy tool. Please do download the tool and give it a try. So with that said, we'll move to the next slide. This slide I can safely say that Chuck will be covering in very detail firewalls and intrusion detections, routers and so on, all these areas. So I'm just going to probably skip. The point on this slide I would only try to spend time on is the need for anti-malware on your production system, some kind of antivirus and all that is good, but these days there are also anti-malware softwares, and these things are really good to have on your production systems. At least scan them once with these kind of tools. With that said, we'll move to the next slide. This is important and this is really interesting. The remote agent on the InduSoft Studio. The remote agent is, if you haven't already used, well, the remote agent is, it really helps to have secure remote connections. It has a lot of built-in encryption features and so on, and the remote connection is to connect to your target device, a remote target device. So we can always publish our files to a remote target device and use that target device for our project. So this connection, once set up, ensures that it syncs up between our production environment and the target device and so on. So this agent can connect even without security. If it is already done so on our products, on our projects, we need to enforce security. This connection, as I said, well, it can always happen without even encryptions and all that. But there is also the encryption features, and if you haven't used it, then we need to be using encryption features and this, we need to really secure the connection. There is a good tutorial on this whole thing. It's very well explained in detail, and it's on the InduSoft website. It's a remote management video. It's a very nice tutorial, and it showcases how exactly to go about the steps to encrypt your connection to the remote target device. So, and also there is a lot of detailed explanation on the help files. Please do take a note, take some time to go through the help files. I've highlighted the point where under the tree of the help topics it comes. So please do take time to have a look at it. And if it's not already been used on our projects, or if there is a project that we all are going to be that we are probably going to be completing in the near future, please, I would really request our integrators to use the encryption feature, and we can always customize an encryption key, and we can make it a strong key and so on. So all these things are there. It's for us to take it and to use it. So if it is not being used, it's a very vulnerable connection. A lot of easily available tools in the market can be used by the hackers, and they can always sniff the networks and try to find out what really is going on in the networks, and they could always cause some trouble. So with that said, the remote agent, the takeaway on the slide is very important. We need to secure this connection, remote connections. There are a lot of built-in features, encryption features on the studio. We need to enable those things. How to do and how to go about enabling these secure features is on the video, a very in-depth video on the InduSoft website, and also it's very clearly outlined in the helps of the studio. So with that said, go to the next slide. This slide is about mobile security. When we say mobile, it's also the BYOD, the bring your own device concepts. Well, with all what to do with how can we secure these devices? This is always a gray area. BYOD is a very much evolving concepts. Every organization deals with it, their own way. So, what the least we can do about this? Well, at least we can probably try to evaluate the risks. If folks in the company are allowed to bring their own devices, well, there has to be a risk assessment done. There has to be, vulnerabilities found in this new processes. These devices should be scanned for regular, patches and so on. And something that's in our hands, we can always restrict the amount of information that really goes out to the user of the device. So we can look at it from the other perspective of a user's device perspective. If a user doesn't need to be getting some information on their mobile device or smartphones, well, we can always try to design delivery of such information to the user. We can always make it more specific to a user. So other than that, the common things like passwords, encryptions, and all that to be taken care of. It's very difficult for me to cover mobile security or BYOD security in a slide in a minute or two. It's a very big discussion, but I would only suggest that we use the security best practices in the industry. We try to incorporate as much as possible, limit the amount of information that is delivered to a user, and so on. So with that said, a small point here and a major point, of course, to note is that InduSoft's delivery of information to a HTML5 compliant mobile browser is secure. There are enough security features on this delivery of information to the mobile browsers. But in addition to that, if there are more security best practices that can be employed, we should always go for that. We should probably go more. We should probably go beyond what even InduSoft provides. So with that said, go to the next slide. This is pretty easy. We all deal with events, logs, alarms, and all that stuff. Sometimes the debate is there as to how much we need to log and all that. Well, we need to really log. It's pretty important to have these alarms and events and all that logged. And more important is clarity in what really is getting logged. We need to really have some defined details out on the logs. Just having a time stamp and having some 2 words of information may not always be helpful. As much clarity on the details that are being logged is always welcome. A lot of clarity in that. With that said, we should always balance, of course, the operator acknowledgements. We don't want operators to be burdened with a lot of alarms for no reason. There's always this balance that needs to take place, volume versus displays may not be so much of a concern these days for us, but at least the volume versus the operator acknowledgements and so on. So this kind of balance sometimes should be taken care of. And not to forget, this data is very, very important for forensic and incident responders. So these folks really perform the investigations based on this data. These are the first things that they would ask for in a forensic investigation. So with that, we'll move to the next. So the takeaway on this slide is let's not really fall short of logging. Let's log as much as possible. Also, let's be cautious and how much we log, what we log. there's a trade-off in too much and too less. So this balance has to be taken care of. So with that said, the next slide is also related to this, logs and LRAMs. Often asked, how long should we have this information, history of data, and should we secure it and keep it aside or not? So yes, at least 7 days. Well, 7 is something. If 10 days of data can be stored, please let's store 10 days. Always good, always useful for the incident management folks. Back up such data and keep it secure. Log files are sometimes, and I would say rather often, they're often things that hackers look for. Logs give a lot of data, so security and how secure we can keep them is always important. Let's not keep a log file under a temp folder on the C drive. It's easily accessible to many people, so let's keep it secure. Small tip there, I just thought I would put this forensic tip. If we have a machine that's compromised, will we think that there's been some hacking going on and some malicious things running on it, please don't power it off. If you have a incident team, or if you have a forensic team in your organization, please do call them. To investigate further. But it would be nice if we don't power it off. What we can do is to probably unplug a network connection for that machine, keep it running, and while we're waiting for the folks to arrive and investigate. So, small tip there. With that, we'll move to the next slide. Pretty easy stuff. And this is about project code, and it's about keeping it simple, secure, and so on. We need to handle errors and exceptions. It's always good not to display the exception or errors straight on the screen. It's always good to capture the exceptions, process them, and display in a nice way. Close the open connections that we have, FTP connections, database connections, and all that. Once we open, it's always good to close. And also in script, within the code of the project, we shouldn't be leaving behind a lot of sensitive information in the comments section. So comments are always there. Comments are not meant for any passwords or any IP addresses and so on, some such sensitive details. So we should be careful for that. And for folks who are really well aware of SQL injections and cross-site scripting, all that stuff, well, if you all can do that, it's good. If not, it's okay. It's good for us to learn about the SQL injections and cross-site scripting. All these things are in the cybersecurity defenses area. So it's good to read about all these things. With that said, we'll just go to the next slide. It's about project documentation. Please be, keep them safe. Destroy the sensitive documents, and documentation is always key to a hacker. They would always start off using such documentation. It's good for them to read through. They know a lot more of the infrastructure based on these documentations and so on. So TFS is a Team Foundation Server, Microsoft product. Please, if for really possible, integrate your InduSoft Studio with TFS. It's readily can be integrated readily. So TFS is really a very important product. It helps in project management, configuration management, and many other things, and so on. So TFS is of a lot of benefits. So please do take some time to read about it and try to integrate your project, InduSoft project, with the TFS. So with that said, we'll move to almost the last slide, I think I would say. We all need to be aware of cybersecurity measures and countermeasures and so on. We need to be aware of all these phishing activities, social engineering activities, emails, with hyperlinks, with attachments. If they're suspicious, we shouldn't be really clicking and opening such attachments and so on. Of course, I can say here on the line saying watch for insider threats. Well, we all watch for it, but how do we go about it? There should be some kind of planning. There should be some kind of time spent on how to deal with insider threats and so on. Please prepare for incident reporting. Very, very important. If an security incident takes place, not a safety incident, if a security incident takes place, how we can report and how we can capture details and so on, so that it's useful for the instant responders and so on. So whenever we all have time, it's always good to go about reading SCADA malwares and in the SCADA world, what all is going on, the threats and all that, the exploits and all that stuff. So with that said, move to the next slide. And this slide is kind of summarizing the trainings and the further readings that we can all enjoy from certifications there. There is the ICS cert and so on. These trainings are free. Please do take some time to go through these trainings and certifications. NIST framework is a good starting point to learn about cybersecurity and all that in the SCADA world. It's a nice PDF document. We can download and read it in our leisure time. With that said, the next slide is a summary of what all I spoke today. Cybersecurity threats are really real in the SCADA world. Let's not take it for granted. The hacker communities, these folks, they probably are busy these days. It's still in the normal networks, the mobile devices, and all that. They're probably focused on those areas, but then they also move into this in the SCADA world, because these are very vulnerable areas. They can always easily exploit. So these volume of and the complexity of such threats, they keep growing each day. Very, very important is to have some kind of security design, security concept, something about security on your project to be as part of your project goals. Risk management process, please let's always have it as a continuous and iterative process. It should be in projects, it should be at all times. And also all stakeholders on a project. We all need to be cyber evangelists. We need to be talking about cybersecurity. It should be part of our discussions. So with that said, I would hand it over to Chuck.
Thank you, Sundar. I'd like to spend a few minutes briefly to talk about firewalls and other SCADA security considerations in the real world, and summarizing what you don't know can't hurt you. As Sundar mentioned, the threats abound. Control systems have become the target of bad actors seeking to hurt national infrastructure, and many of them are just too vulnerable. In his slides earlier, he mentioned that malicious code is one of the most significant threat vectors, and let's talk about some examples of how that was put to use. In the first threat scenario, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, 2006, an employee of a water company had a company laptop properly protected in his home office, connected to the control network through a VPN, and a hacker used techniques to infect that machine with a virus, which then propagated through a VPN connection into the control network and infected another vulnerable Windows PC. That PC was at the heart of the control system and was then used to distribute spam email. Certainly didn't affect the function of the facility, but certainly was unintended and unwelcome. A more publicly known one recently is the Stuxnet virus. In June of 2010, it was revealed that this piece of malware had been constructed. It was a worm, so it spread autonomously from computer to computer through the network, and it attacked in three phases. First, it looked for vulnerable Windows machines, finding those machines and then replicating itself from machine to machine. As it infected these machines, it sought out Siemens Step 7 software very intentionally because it had a specific purpose. Once it found those machines, it then used those connections to infect the PLCs. And from the PLCs, it could spy on the activities of the industrial systems, in this case, centrifuges for uranium enrichment, causing the data to be collected and reported back to the controllers, but then eventually providing false data to the operators of the centrifuges while it oversped the centrifuges themselves, causing their destruction. So clearly a very malicious outcome. Threat mitigation, there are a number of things we can talk about, and we'll cover them briefly here, but firewalls and then managing industry-specific protocols looking at network and file and folder level security, Sundar touched on, controlling physical access, blocking known threats and unknown ports, making sure that USB keys are not useful or usable on your SCADA networks, and making sure you keep up with your software updates. Firewalls, first line of defense for most networks, they are the perimeter security, standing between you and the bad guys. They work at a fairly low level. They're functionally very simple devices in many ways, looking at the data and network layers, OSI layer 2 and 3. And they just look at packets, dropping those packets that match threat rules. Specifically, these devices take a good bit of expertise to get it right and can be misconfigured, leaving vulnerabilities. Basic types of firewalls fall into three categories: packet filters, stateful packet filters, and application-aware packet filters. I'll talk about those. But first, what is a packet? The screen is showing a packet capture, and this is an individual packet captured from a network as it moved from one computer to another. And it lists the frame of the packet, it lists some internet protocol information, as well as some user datagram protocol information, more application specific. The packet filters or simple firewalls are just looking at these packets at the most fundamental level, making decisions solely based on the information within the packet, but specifically making decisions without regard to the packet's potential relationship to other packets. In other words, it doesn't understand the stream of the information flow. It just sees this single packet. So work is done there at the network and physical layers, checking the transport layer only for source and destination port numbers. The rules in these devices are static, and the limitations are they cannot understand the context of the connection, HTTPS or BACnet or whatever protocol might be in use, and they cannot understand the bounds of an application. Packet inspection looks something like this. I've highlighted a few elements on the screen there that show some of the items in the packet that a simple firewall is looking at. Source and destination, IP addresses, as well as the source and destination port and the protocol. Stateful or second generation firewalls are more sophisticated. They perform all the functions of a simple firewall, but they retain knowledge of the packet long enough to know if the packet is part of a connection, the start of a connection, or not part of any connection at all. The rules are still static in these devices, but now at least they can make decisions based on the packet's relationship to its connection state. It cannot, however, detect events that would be out of bounds for a particular application protocol. So something that would be illegal in an HTTPS transaction or a BACnet transaction. Stateful packet inspection looks more like this. I've added the green to it. You see a sequence of frames in the connection. We're looking at frame 92, and again, it's the same packet we looked at before. Next generation firewalls become application aware. This is where they can get quite powerful. They operate, again, with TCP and UDP protocols, OSI layer 2, 3, and 4. They have some understanding of known protocols, FTP, SMTP, DNS, and others, and industry-specific protocols as well. And because of this understanding of the protocols, they can detect attempts to gain access through misuse of standard or known application protocols. They perform their work through deep packet inspection, looking deeply into what's going on within the packet. And intrusion detection decisions can be made here as well to automatically block bad actors who are attempting to gain access to your network. Taking it a step further, there are some industry-specific firewalls that allow a detailed understanding of SCADA-specific protocols and can apply all the aforementioned to the industry-specific traffic. They can process and block SCADA-specific threats, and they're most effective in protecting SCADA and HMI applications, specifically allowing for security zones as recommended in ISA IEC 62443 standards. They can also provide centralized management and reporting across the facility, which is crucial for early detection. The benefits of these industry-specific firewalls are that they allow preemptive, protocol-specific threat detection and termination, centralized threat reporting, and they allow for mitigation of known threats prior to the release of new firmware and eliminates the need for unplanned outages just to update your firmware to avoid threat factors. An application-aware inspection looks more like this. Again, the green from the last slide and some orange looking into the data of the BACnet transaction. Then we move on to network and file-level security. As Sundar mentioned, file-level encryption can be very powerful in retaining protection over your data. Windows NTFS permissions, specifically security groups and share permissions, make sure that only the appropriate authorized individuals have access to the data in the various locations throughout your network. We also strongly recommend SMB signing between machines that allows basically a signature placed on it at the point of creation and then processed at the point of receipt to allow assurance that there was no man in the middle, no one picking up the packet and changing it between the source and the destination. We also strongly recommend looking at remote desktop limitations. Port 3389 is commonly known. We frequently found networks where that port is available to folks that you might not want it available to, and it's very important to lock that down either at the machine level or at the firewall to only known IP addresses and subnets. Caveats, things to watch out for, given users with access to the InduSoft project folder, you must manage security. There's too many things there that need to be carefully managed. You also need to secure other critical areas using file and folder level security. And Windows domain security is best. The Active Directory and the NTFS that really allows centralized management of credentials and authentication and provides much greater security. Windows Workgroup security is much less granular and not centrally managed and opens your network to a number of vulnerabilities. Physical access controls, while they were low on Sundar's list of potential threat vectors, it's still good in our opinion to lock things up. Password and keypad protected rooms, biometric access, and good old-fashioned locks. Just lock it down so that people can't get to the console, can't physically gain access to the machine, and or even steal a machine, because that can also be disruptive to a process. Compartmentalized machine access, locked racks within locked rooms, and limiting USB key functionality by disabling the drivers, which prevents them from working if the key is inserted. Proactive security is focused on blocking known access ports, using non-standard ports either through port translation or through setup configurations, so that the people on the outside don't see port 1234 or port 21, and authorized people know the appropriate ports. Open only the minimum number of required ports for your application, and penetration tested periodically to reveal oversights. From time to time, routine maintenance of a firewall or a network can unintentionally leave a port open that can lead to a vulnerability down the road. Software security, we all know how important it is to patch Windows. And we know that Windows XP is no longer in maintenance by Microsoft. So we need to make sure that we keep our operating systems current and our patches on those operating systems current. The vulnerabilities may not start in the HMI infrastructure. Both the examples I gave, the vulnerabilities started in a Windows PC and were able to make their way into the networks through PCs connected to the SCADA infrastructure. So they can easily start on a laptop or desktop and spread to the control systems. Vendor patches and service packs, obviously the latest InduSoft is version 7.1 Service Pack 3 for most of you. Hardware firmware is also something that's too often overlooked. Vendors plug vulnerabilities and release updates to firmware, and that needs to be maintained. You also need to stay aware of the common vulnerabilities and exposures. The cv.miter.org has a number of them, and 5 listed here to Sundar's point on malicious code. 4 of the 5 of these reflect the ability of a bad actor to execute arbitrary code for malicious intent due to a bug. References for this, and then I'll turn it over to Larry for Q&A.
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Sundar. So, yeah, we've gone a little over time, but we do want to leave time for question and answer. If you go to the WebEx Event Center toolbar at the top of the screen, you can see a chat icon where you can post questions. So if you do have specific questions that you'd like to ask, then go ahead and put them on the chat, and we'll take opportunity to answer those questions for you. So one question we have is, Chuck, this might be directed to you. Our company allows a bring-your-own-device policy. How can this affect the control system network?
Well, any time you have an unmanaged device, a personal asset on a corporate network, it allows for a compromised device to scan the network for vulnerabilities. We strongly recommend that the BYOD, the Androids, the iPhones, the tablets, either be managed through the corporate security infrastructure or be kept on a guest network in a VLAN separate from corporate data flow, so that the unmanaged device doesn't have access to scan and determine any vulnerabilities that may exist.
Great. Sundar, one of your presentations had a question about emergency situations versus safety, and one customer asks, if the bad guys create an emergency situation, knowing that security will be lowered, what tips can you give us to build into our projects when this kind of emergency state occurs?
Well, as I was mentioning earlier, safety is always important over security. If there is something as emergency related to a safety issue, well, we probably will need to go in the way of the safety and override security at such times. So it's a difficult balance, but it should be part of our risk assessment plans. It should be part of the risk assessment process. But eventually, safety is important. I would always err on the side of caution. So the security, well, such times should be such that there can be overrides possible, and safety is of most importance. So we can safely shut down a system or something like that.
Good, good. One person asks, is this presentation available for later view? And the answer is yes. In the next few days, the recorded presentation will be available, as well as you'll have access to the slides if you would like. All of the presenters' contact information is in the presentation. If you want to contact InduSoft directly, then here's some information you can use to contact us, either for sales or business development or support or just website access. So, Chuck, one final question for you, and we'll wrap up. So my company has InduSoft deployed on XP. Do I really need to be worried about this, or is this a marketing ploy by Microsoft?
I really think you do need to be worried about it. XP is a platform that obviously preceded Vista and Windows 7 and Windows 8, but Microsoft continues to release security patches for the later operating systems, and as they do so, the bad guys will go back to Windows XP and see if that vulnerability also affected XP. So it's giving the bad guys a cheat sheet, if you will, on potential holes that may exist in XP, and they have the luxury of knowing that those holes may never be plugged. So it's particularly dangerous, to use a scary word, to keep those XP systems where they are. I would strongly recommend looking at an upgrade. Okay,
so one final question that just came in before we end. Customer, and this actually probably is true for a lot of our InduSoft customers. We have a simple site, basically one Windows 7 server connected to the internet via a router. What specific steps should we take to protect ourselves, and specifically any software that you could recommend that we use?
Sundar, you want to take that, or shall I? I would strongly look at the capabilities of the router. The router is the big dog in the pack, keeping you protected from the world. It can scan the traffic, as we discussed, but it can also look at the traffic for potential antivirus and malware signatures, intrusion detection. So I would really look at a strong router with proper licensing for the security suites available. There are a number of routers that are out there. Cisco obviously makes some good ones. We prefer WatchGuard routers for most of our clients because they are fairly straightforward to train people how to use, and they have a broad suite of malware and intrusion detection, data loss prevention to keep good data from going out without your knowledge as well.
Great, thanks. So again, if you have some specific questions or comments, you can reach out to the individual representatives here. You can reach out to me as well. My email's not on here, but you can contact me at larry.combs@indusoft.com. So I appreciate your attendance and appreciate your time. And again, in the next few days, this will be up on our website for review. Thanks.